I also want to tell you, or help you understand, that there's been a significant amount of change over at CBE. I'm sure most of you are aware that we had a lot of leadership change, both up in the upper echelon and even within our own unit. So I'll take a quick minute just to introduce you to the current Schools of Choice unit. I'm Peg McMillan. I oversee the grant, the CSP grant, that some of you are participating in or have participated in the past. Brian Martin is the newest member of our unit. Brian comes from DC just recently. Started full-time with us this week, but he was in Atlanta all week. So next week will be his first full-time opportunity to work with us. He will be the operation manager in our unit. Kelly is continued. She's the longest woman standing at the moment. She'll continue with Schools of Choice, but she's also heavily involved in waivers and innovation, so she's straddling two worlds. And then back here at the table, we have Whitney and Ellen. They're both part of our unit as well. We're hoping that we're going to come together and gel tightly to be a better resource for you in the future. Please be patient with us as we pull that together. But we're very supportive of charter schools and want to be of service to you, so please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you have. And that's really all I have to say for you today. Please welcome Laura and Jen Garzatis as they present to you on the Board of Administration.
And I'm Joni Malley, and I'm the wind behind Thunder Nora's wing, something like that. But anyway, we have a group of people joining us remotely this morning, and so we need to, hopefully, you guys, you're gonna have to project as much as you can. But I just wanted to let you all, know that we do have another 12, I think, people, 16 joining us remotely, and this is kind of our maiden voyage, and we just want to offer that so people like somebody back there who drove up from Pueblo has an option and doesn't have to drive all that way so early in the morning. But anyway, I just wanted to say that so you would know to speak up.
Thank you, and thank you everybody, and thanks to our team because I just show up. I don't do any of the background of any of this, so I just get to show up. So my name's Nora. I'm the president of the Colorado League of Charter Schools. I've been here for 8.5 years, president for 3.5. Before that, the vice president of school services. I was actually a teacher and a principal for 30 years in traditional public schools. I was overseas for 4 years. Started a little nonprofit school in Minneapolis, then a Tony Country Day School, and then a charter school in Northern California. So I've kind of seen all of the missions and models of our schools across the country and out of our country. And I want you to know that the vision statement for the Charter League doesn't even have the word charter in it. So our vision statement is that every child in Colorado has access to a high quality public school option. And we want charter schools to be one of those mechanisms. And we believe very strongly in partnerships with the CBE, with other organizations like the Center for Professional Development at Peak to Peak Charter School when I introduced Jen. We believe very strongly that, in fact, as a charter sector, we have a strong voice. And that the more we get to know about one another, the more we practice well, the better it helps us at our district level when we're fighting for local mill levy and bond sharing, when we're fighting for autonomy, when we recognize our accountability in an appropriate way, that the higher the quality of our schools, the easier the job of our authorizers. The better the practice of the authorizers, the easier and the more successful chance for us as charter schools. So we believe very strongly in partnerships across the state and federally. So we work and push on federal mandates on charter schools as well. So just so you know, our organization is the membership organization for the 235 schools across the state. We have about 96% membership. Some who choose not to join, which is fine. We fight for all charter schools. We have about 96% membership of all the schools. So we feel like when we do speak with legislators, we can actually say that we speak on behalf of charter. So thank you to all of you who have joined the league. We appreciate it. Helps to pay her salary. That's a good thing. I'd like to introduce my partner. My partner is Jen Dos Vardas, who, by the way, used to work in the Schools of Choice unit. We we are an incestuous little charter school community. And years ago, back in the day, how long were you there?
I was there, I think about 4.5, close to 5 years. So,
Yeah.
quick introduction.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, I love this. This is one of my favorite things about being in the charter school world is, I know it's bizarre, but doing board trainings. My background is that, in previous life, I was actually a landscape architect. I had kids, I backed my way onto a charter school board, and here I am today. So I was a founder at Flagstaff Academy up in Longmont. Today, I am the communications manager at Peachtree Charter School. I also play a role in the Center for Professional Development, which is our sort of outward-facing wraparound to provide an opportunity for community among charter schools. So that's a quick 1-2 with my position.
And then Jen and I present a lot together. So we present at our state conference in February, which I hope you all will attend. We present at national conferences as well. So we're sort of like a Mutt and Jeff.
And we've been doing
I'm
it
the
for
Mutt,
8 years.
she gets to be Jeff. We've been doing this for about 8 years. So we love presenting together. So please understand when we like interrupt one another, it's what we do. It's not being disrespectful to one another because we come from different backgrounds and different visions of and examples, anecdotal kinds of things with governance. And so we think it kind of breaks it up for you so you don't have to sit and look at me for 6 hours or whatever it winds up being. So I'm really happy to have my partner Jen here with us. So we're going to do a real quick introductions. First of all, I want to thank all of the people who are joining us by webinar. Like I said, we have about 16 people from Pueblo and Crestone, from the urban area, from Pagosa, from Glenwood Springs, Paradox Valley, St. Vrain, Pueblo, did I say Pueblo? Colorado Springs, Georgetown. We have just a slew of people from around the state. So again, 235 schools. If you think about the I-25 corridor, the majority of our schools are located 20 miles either side of the I-25 corridor from the Wyoming border down to the New Mexico border. But then we have little Paradox Valley Charter School in Paradox. We've got Lamar, we've got Steamboat, Cortez, Marble, Lake George, it's Guffey, they're all over the state. So we're really pleased to start figuring out how, being a total Luddite, we can start reaching them more electronically for our trainings. So thank you very much to all of you who are joining us by webinar. And then if we could please real quickly run through who you are and your role at the school, that would be fabulous.
Steve Hester from James Irving Charter Schools in Colorado Springs, the board president.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm Deb Wilson at Global Village Academy, Douglas County, and I'm board president.
Christopher Young, Douglas County, Village, and Secretary.
Don Braswell, Global
Village, Douglas County, and Treasurer.
Kelly Morrow, I'm the community school, and I'm the director of education. Welcome.
John Gallagher, I'm with Breach Charter School. This is probably my second week.
Right on.
And I'm treasurer of the board.
Michelle Zoltan, I'm with Westgate School, community school, and board member. Hi, I'm Melanie Medeiros, I'm also with Westgate Community School, and I'm board secretary.
I'm Brian Harper, St. Vrain Community Montessori and board treasurer. I'm Steve Carr, St. Vrain Community Montessori School, hoping to be on the board.
Oh, great. Oh, good.
Wow, it's just wonderful.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tracy Scroggins with Spin School and Academy, brand spanking new board member.
Wonderful.
Jeff Anderson from New Road Academy in Arvada, board treasurer.
Thank you.
Boyd Martinez with STEM School Academy. Harold Johnson, Mara Classical Studio Arts, Coach School in Colorado Springs. I'm the founder, team member.
You're here.
Jen King, Douglas County Parker Performing Arts School board member.
Aaron Adamson, Parker Performing Arts School board member.
I am Jenny Ungela, and I'm a new board member at Windsor Charter Academy.
Troy Harris, Global School of Arts and Sciences board member.
Thank you, Troy. Hi.
Jan Holman, board president for Stargate Charter School. Callie Herzog, I am the vice president and secretary at Stargate.
Jim Higgins, local government academy, North Platte,
Excellent. So one of the things that we also love to talk about are the different missions and models of our charter schools across the state. Everything from Waldorf and Montessori and dual language Montessori, expeditionary learning, core knowledge, classically based schools, our schools for the arts. We have a charter school for pregnant and parenting teens. We have place-based schools that study their surroundings, and that's the focus of their curriculum. So it's one of the things that we love so much about charter schools is the idea that we can develop and then support our own missions and models and try to engage in our communities as they see the need. So thank you all very, very much.
I'll add to that part of the reason I so enjoy doing board trainings and so enjoy being out talking to other schools is that in my experience, every single charter school I come across honestly and deeply believes that they are the very best one. And I think that, like, how lucky are our kids that that's the case? So thank you all for what you do.
Yeah, thank you. And for those of you who are new, please know this is going to be like drinking from the fire hose. This is a lot of information. So we actually also recommend doing an on-site, even a 2-hour, like this is how now this applies to our school. This is how we do it. Because what we're going to give you is the very broad overview of your legal responsibilities as a board, your individual board member responsibilities, a little bit about oversight versus management of schools. And I'm really glad we have at least one of our school leaders here. It's great. Because when we do board trainings individually at schools, we really want everyone in the room. So everyone is hearing the same thing. And we'll talk a little bit about our agenda today and how we're going to focus more on the board school leader relationship this afternoon. So if you would please open up your folder. And first of all, just another quick update. We are firm believers in food, fun, and finish on time. So we will have you out of here by 2 o'clock. And I'm sorry, those of you who are on our webinar, you'll have to provide your own food. Sorry. So we'll have food, fun, and finish on time, have you out of here by 2. There are bathrooms just behind us through that hallway, so you can actually just go right out behind us, and there are bathrooms right out behind us. Please just take care of yourselves. We do have one break today, this morning, before we hit lunch. So we'll have one break from 10:45 to 11, and then we'll have lunch, and then we're going to actually break into 2 groups, and I'll go through that when I go through the agenda.
Since we have the air conditioner, which you'll be glad of later, it might be easier if you just go out this door and then make the first right, and then the restrooms are right behind us. But that way you don't have to step over the big hose.
Okay.
You probably haven't seen that.
Yeah. Okay. So if you would kindly open your folders, on the left-hand side of your folder is league propaganda. It's who we are, so you learn a little bit more about who we are as an organization, what we provide to our schools. That's on the left-hand side. There is a card there for our annual conference, which is coming up in February. We're in the early registration phase for our conference, so please pay attention to that. It's a great conference. We have strands for boards, school leaders, and in all different areas. So it's a pretty robust conference. We think we may actually break 900 people at the conference this year. Next year, in 2018, is the 25th anniversary of the passage of the charter school law in Colorado. So that's going to be a shindig. So it's always in February, so pay attention to the dates, and we'll put out a save the date for next year already this year. So we've got that date already set. So on the right-hand side is the agenda for today. So we're going to go through this briefly, and then we're just going to launch. So I'll stop and ask if there are any questions about the day, and then we're just going to get going. So the first part of this is going to be, again, about legal responsibilities of board members, how we are organized in the state of Colorado, which is different than in some states. We're organized both as nonprofits and as local governmental bodies, and as such have responsibilities in both. We'll go through individual board member roles and responsibilities and then take a break. And then in the next part, we're going to talk, kind of finish up on individual board member roles and responsibilities. CSSI is the Charter School Support Initiative that those of you who are recipients of the federal charter school program grant that is administered through our CDE Schools of Choice unit, you will have a visit from CSSI in one of your first years of operation. And they'll be evaluating your school on a couple of different areas. We're going to focus today, because of the board membership here, we're going to focus on what they're going to look at in terms of your board practice and then your financial oversight. So we've had about 30 charter schools close over the years, either being non-renewed, relinquishing their charter, very few of them but being canceled mid-cycle of their contract, and almost to the school it is for operational reasons. It's for governance and finance. It's not for academics. So you have a heavy responsibility ahead of you, but we're going to help, and we're always here to answer questions and to help you through when you hit speed bumps, which you will. Don't worry, you will. Then we'll go into, again, some question and answers, but we've got basically the answers to the test for what you will be evaluated on through that CSSI visit in both governance and finance. So we'll focus again on what kinds of things you need to make sure are in place at your schools in order to go through a sound evaluation with them. We're going to talk then, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah.
Because that's how I roll.
Okay.
Answers to the test. I just want to expand on that a little bit and say that it's the skills and the processes that we want to see you developing.
Mm-hmm.
So when the CSSI team comes in, they want to see some things in place, and that's what this is about.
Right.
Answers to the test.
Right. And one of the other things, some of you are joining boards new, but with schools that have existed for a long time, it is as important for you to have all of these policies, processes, protocols, documents in place when you are a brand new school as it is when you are a long-serving school. We talk about life cycles of schools, and sometimes it's harder when you come into a school that is 15 years old and you realize you don't have things in place. So for those of you who are just starting schools, good on you to make sure that you start out of the gate having all of these kinds of things in place. You will hear us over the course of the day talk about making our schools person-proof. Because if anybody wins the lottery and moves to the Bahamas, we don't use hit by the bus. We use win the lottery and move to the Bahamas. If anybody in your school, whether it's the school leader, board chair, PTO president, anybody wins the lottery and moves to the Bahamas, can you continue without skipping a beat? So by really practicing well and getting yourselves organized and with all of these protocols, policies, documents in place at the beginning, you'll kind of set the stage for how your school continues through the life cycle. So that is the agenda for today. Anything before? Any questions on the agenda? Some people don't have that. Here, I've got another one.
Yeah,
Anyone else need?
Myself, there's a one. Okay, all right. Quality control. I'm so sorry. Okay.
No worries.
Yes, hi.
Is it possible to get some of these things that you passed in physical copy electronically?
Yes. Yes. So the question was, can we give these to you electronically? Yes. So much of what we talk about today will also involve some practice, and we can't do all of those practice activities today. So when you look through these modules, and again, we'll go through the right-hand side and kind of explain what's in the right-hand side for you, you'll also see that embedded within some of these modules are practice activities. Idea being that you go back to your board and actually say, look, let's put 15 minutes on our board agenda and go through this practice activity with us as a board. It's impossible for us to do all of that today. When we do individual board trainings with schools, Joni sends out a kind of a survey monkey survey before the board training that says, where do you think you need to spend most of your time in the board training? And it helps you to identify where you feel like you have some challenges. And then there are activities. So for today, we're doing the kind of full blast. But yes, to answer the question, these things are available electronically and Joni can get them out to you. Okay. So on the right-hand side then, what I was talking about, each of these are considered modules with us, because again, depending on what the school's needs are, we can personalize the trainings for you as a school based on what you think you need more help with. So we're going to start then.
I'm just gonna stand in front of the fan.
Jen's just going to stand in front of the fan. Okay. So we're going to get started then, and we're going to start with, in fact, the legal roles. First of all, the sound governing board with effective governance practice is critical to a successful school. So one of the things, again, that we talk often about is that I think we can all agree that it is the teacher in the classroom who most positively impacts the success of a child. But it is the leadership of the school at the building level and the board level, we believe, that most positively impacts the success of a school. So to my point about why we have many of our schools that do wind up struggling, and Jen and I unfortunately often do a presentation at our conference called Avoiding the Death Spiral. We tried to think of a more positive way, and we thought that was like a little punish way to say it, but avoiding the death spiral, because it can happen. And once that happens at the leadership level and you start losing focus on your mission and vision, you overestimate your enrollment and now your budget is sideways and you can't meet budget, things can happen. So we believe strongly that at the governance and the building leader level, it is where the success of the school lies. So the very first ones that we're going to go through are the legal duties and the laws that impact you, the individual board responsibilities, board process, some strategic planning and oversight. We're not going to do strategic planning today, but we'll talk through the need for strategic planning and why we think that's so important. What academic and financial oversight looks like, why we think that you as boards should have professional development, just like you would expect your school leaders and teachers to have professional development, for you to evaluate your practice annually and set your own goals. What is it that you as a board need to work on this year so that you have some metrics that measure your success as well as a board?
I would just add that everything that's on that page, in concept, pretty easy, pretty straightforward. In concept, understanding it is, it's actually pretty simple. In practice, how many of you are parents, uncles, grandparents, guardians, otherwise of students at the school where you are a board member? That's what makes it really hard, right? Insert the human being, insert the relationships, and that's where conflict happens and those lines blur and it becomes difficult. And that's what fascinates me the most about this whole process.
I think that's exactly spot on, because we can tell you this and you say, okay, got it. And then you go back and you go to the very first board meeting and something happens and you're like, okay, don't got it.
Right. And that's why it's so important that this is all gonna blow your hair back. This is a lot of information. And until you're ready to ask the question, like, what do we do when someone comes to the board and asks a question about the type of apples we provide in the cafeteria? Then you go, which one of these applies in that? I'm not sure what to do. And that's why it's so important to have someone come to your school and say, okay, let's talk about how this applies.
That's when you say, talk to the principal.
Good answer.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So in getting started, this is now your sort of pewter. We're going to go with fun colors today. Pewter sheets. And do our webinar folks have these pewter sheets? So we're going to talk about then how we're organized as charter schools in the state of Colorado. So I said that we are organized two different ways. You are required by law to be registered with the Secretary of State's office as a nonprofit. Once a year, you have to make sure you are still current. So it used to be, again, back in the day, they would literally send a postcard to the schools reminding you to go onto the Secretary of State's website to make sure you're current. Well, we all know what happened to that card, right? It went into somebody's file or got misplaced, or somebody who won the lottery left and now it just sat on somebody's desk. They now do that by email. So once again, you'll want to check to see whose email it goes to. And to our point about making things person-proof, make sure it doesn't go to a person. Because if it goes to shester@jameserwin.org and Steve wins the lottery and moves to the Bahamas, and his email is now canceled, that can get lost. So look at it and make sure it goes to board@businessmanager@ whoever it would be. That's going to track that annually. So as a nonprofit, you are required as board members to operate, this is legal language, ready? As ordinarily prudent persons. So if any one of you does not consider yourself to be an ordinarily prudent person, I would ask that you step off the board. And that is a legal standard, interestingly, that actually has a definition behind it. So to act as an ordinarily prudent person means that no one expects you to be an expert in anything to sit on a charter school board. Kind of a blessing and a curse, right? No one expects you to be an expert in anything to sit on a charter school board. However, and we're not going to read through each of these, they're on your paper, and you can take some notes beside this or underneath these. And then when we go through your individual board member responsibilities, they really personify these three duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. Want to take these?
I don't want to go through them in detail, right? Because I think that it's worthy of the exercise. It's worthy of taking this first sheet back to your board and saying, let's talk about this. And then when you have those critical moments where you're like, I'm not sure what we're supposed to do here, coming back and saying, okay, what does it mean to be obedient to obedient to the organization, obedient to our policies, obedient to our stakeholders, obedient to our mission? What does that mean, and what does it mean in this situation? Sometimes jumping up to that sort of 30,000-foot level and looking at your issue from that perspective is a gift.
Mm-hmm. So when we run through these real quickly then, and again, you can take some quick notes, but they're pretty self-explanatory. The duty of care simply says that you commit to being a good board member. You commit to coming to meetings.
Prepared.
You commit to coming to them prepared. You commit to coming to them prepared and being willing to discuss. We often talk in terms of governance as being willing to have courageous conversations. Like, you have to speak up. If you see something that you question, you have both the right and the responsibility as a board member to ask questions and make sure you know enough about the school that you know what your oversight looks like. How are you measuring things? You know, there is that adage that you can't expect what you can't inspect. You have the right to ask those questions. The contract for your charter school is held between you as a board and your authorizer's board, either the district or the Charter School Institute. So your contract is held between you and your authorizer's board, not with the school leader and the superintendent, or not person to
Not with a
person.
service provider, not with a CMO.
Right, if any of you are working with an EMO or CMO, educational management organization or charter management organization, it is the board that holds the contract, not that educational service provider. So the duty of care basically says that you will be an attentive board member and take your role seriously. It also means you're going to be willing to take hard votes. So often what we see, and I've actually just had someone on a board say this, they said, well, we're a consensus board, so we think every vote has to be a unanimous vote. And I said, I don't believe that. I think that sometimes disagreement is good. It shows thoughtfulness. It shows that you're not just a rubber stamp board or a puppet board. You know, it shows that you have differing opinions, which we think is good.
And I think ultimately at the root of that, that's the reason you're a board and not a person, right? Because a person can unilaterally make a decision. A board is multiple minds coming together. So disagreement is actually, it behooves you.
The next one, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of an exercise here before we do the next one. Would you please turn over your agenda or a piece of paper, and on the back of it, would you write down the mission statement for your school?
It always gets a hum, doesn't it? A little purr in the crowd.
And those of you at home or in your offices, without cheating, write down the mission statement of your school. No looking online. Okay, that was a bit of a trick question, but it wasn't. You may stop. The reason that we say that is because the mission statement of the school is your holy grail. The mission statement of the school should be everywhere and everyone should know it. It should be in the foyer as people walk in. It should be in every classroom. It should be at the top of your agenda. And I was at a board meeting the other night and they read it off at the beginning of every board meeting. It should be on top of mind with your teachers. Your parents should know it. very often what we see with mission statements is that schools will adopt some kind of a slogan or some type of an acronym, you know, RISE, and it's respect, innovation, blah, blah, blah. Something like that, that again exemplifies what your mission is. That's great, but you should know what your mission is because it is one of your greatest responsibilities to, at the beginning of a school, determine what your mission is. And then as your school opens, to support that mission and make sure that you are who you say you are. Because that's what we talk about. Your mission statement tells the world who you are. And what happens every day inside the walls of your school is, are you who you say you are? And then, how do you know? So,
Sorry, I like to describe the mission as the point A, and your vision is point B. I'll give you an example. Microsoft's vision was a computer in every home. Doesn't tell us what they do every day to make that happen. Their mission is something entirely different. So the vision is what's out in the future, it's where you're headed. The mission is what you do every day to take a step towards that, vision. And your strategic plan is your path to get there, but we'll get to that later today. I also would add that not only should every stakeholder in your school know what the mission is, essentially, maybe not verbatim, but they should essentially understand what your focus is. But you, as a board, should also define the terms. So if you say rigorous curriculum, someone might interpret that word rigorous differently than another. So you as a board have the responsibility to say, what do you mean by rigorous? What do you mean by character? And so you have to provide definition to what that mission means as well. It's part of aligning your community.
yeah, that's perfect. We actually do that when we work with individual schools. We pull the mission statement apart and say, what are the critical words within your mission statement? And then when you look at that, to say, how do we know if we're doing that? And you talk with the school leader, because they're, again, the ones on the ground every day. It's like, how do we know whether or not we're doing what we say we're going to do? So the duty of loyalty is really important. The other thing, for those of you who raised your hands and said that you may have a child within the school, it's really important to recognize that your loyalty is to the mission of the school, and that sometimes you may be asked to make a decision that may not be in the best interest of your child, but is in the best interest of a school. So we have lots of anecdotal on this. That's one, Little Legacy Academy in Elizabeth that had been a K-8 and decided to add a high school. High schools are tremendously expensive. Those of you who are in high schools know this. So they added a high school, and the high school was not sustainable. And they were poaching every year from the elementary school to support the high school because they didn't have a high enough enrollment. After a few years, they had a 5-member board. 4 of the 5 board members had kids in the high school. 3 of them had kids who were going to be seniors. After a few years, they had to decide whether that was a viable high school or not and make a decision. So I went out and helped facilitate a meeting where they had to take this vote. Hornet's nest of parents on both sides of the issue, right? We've got to take this, you're taking money from our elementary school, or you can't do this, my kids have been here forever, they've got to graduate from here. They took a vote, and the swing vote, because it was a 5-member board, was one of the board members, the board chair, whose daughter was going to be a senior, had been in the school since she was a little kid, and he voted to close the high school. It was the most selfless thing, and he just cried. It was the most selfless thing. But his loyalty was to the school, the sustainability and viability of the school, and the mission of the school, and he knew he had to make a tough decision. So that's really hard for those of you who are parents on the board, and we acknowledge that, and you need to acknowledge that. And then the last one, the duty of obedience, is likewise your obedience, and that's not our language, that's actually in the nonprofit law. The duty of obedience basically says that when you then, as a board, make a decision, you speak with one voice. So when we talked about a split vote, first of all, anyone on the board can ask for a voice vote. If you typically do that, all in favor, aye, all opposed, nay, that kind of thing, anyone can ask for a voice vote. And it's especially, I think, important when it is a split vote, that you actually register where you stood on a given issue. But then it's what happens if you are a minority vote on the board when you walk out of that meeting. When you walk out of that meeting and somebody comes up to you and says, I cannot believe that you voted to close that high school. What's your response? I know. I didn't vote for it. You know that People will try to find the chink in the armor. They will try to find the board member they can agitate with or who they will get their ear, who will say, you're right, I'm gonna take it back to the board. So understand that when you walk out, you have to have some language that says, you know what, we don't always agree on votes, but when we have a tough decision to make, we get all the information, we have rigorous conversations and discussions on it, and then when we take a vote, we support the vote of the board. And I may not have voted for it, because it's open, right? I may not have voted for it, but understand that I support the vote of the board. That's your duty of obedience.
So I'd love to ask this question, just because it's thought-provoking, and this is a good time to do it. Does the board exist outside of the board meeting, outside of the boardroom? Does the board exist?
We've got, so the question, does the board exist outside the boardroom? We've got some of this, we've got some of this. Does the board exist outside of the boardroom? You better not, because you're violating other meetings.
So the impact of your work exists, right? But as a decision-making entity, you don't exist outside the boardroom. It's when you come together, you become the board, right?
Right.
When you come together in a meeting.
And you as one board member will never speak for the board. Unless, of course, it's something like it's a media call and we have the board chair who's speaking for the school as the spokesperson. But otherwise, you don't speak for the board. You know, that's a really good idea. I'm gonna take that back to the board and we're gonna address that. You don't get to do that. You can say, that's interesting. Why don't you come to public comment? Why don't you write that up and send it to the board? Or I'll talk to the board and see if we want to put that on the agenda. Of course, people are going to know you're a board member. And so you do say things like that, but you don't speak for the board, if that makes sense. This is where our board stands on this. Unless it's a vote. If you've taken a vote, then it's a public record. Okay? The second way that we are organized in Colorado is as a local governmental body. CSI schools, we actually got changed in legislation last year. How many of you are CSI schools? Okay. So the Charter School Institute is a state entity. Up until last year, the state treated each of the schools under the CSI umbrella as a state entity. And so as a state governmental body, 2 people represent an open meeting of the board according to open meetings law. So now we have aligned that so that it is 3 of you as a board. So we got legislation actually changed last year to allow CSI to follow the other charter school law that it is 3. So when we talk about this, if you'll flip now, the next pages, again, we're not going to read to you. This is when you have insomnia and you want to go through all of these documents and read them word for word. It's a really good way to go to sleep with a cup of tea or a glass of wine. Open meetings. The way that open meetings are defined because of our local governmental body status is that it is 3 or a quorum, whichever is fewer. It's kind of confusing language, but it's 3 or a quorum, whichever is fewer, constitutes an open meeting. The reason they do that is for the majority of you, you have at least 5 members of a board, typically more, then it would be 3, right? But if you had somebody who had a book deal and went out on a book tour, somebody who won the lottery and went and moved to the Bahamas, and you had a 5-member board, now you only have 3 members of your board, 2 is a quorum. So it's 3 or a quorum, whichever is fewer. So just think about it in terms of 3, unless you would get down to 3 members for whatever reason, refill your board as quickly as you can.
We have 3 voting members, head of school who's non-voting, and a teacher rep. So what's a quorum?
2.
Okay.
2.
What if we have 4 voting members? Is it still 2?
One would say 2 because it's a split,
So it's enough of
it's
a
even,
majority,
so
yeah.
you got it, right. So I would be careful about that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say something here as well about having non-voting or ex officio is another way that some people say it, non-voting, and they don't actually mean the same thing I just said. Member of the board. I just talked to an attorney and I said, you know, my feeling is that's gonna get litigated. That if you have somebody who is a non-voting member of the board, you are naming them as a member of the board. They're a non-voting member of the board. but you have named them as a member of the board, and I think that's gonna get litigated, that some external party that is anti-charter is going to say, if you do that, that means that person counts in that forum. So I'd be really careful and instead say something like, the head of school is advisory to the board and is expected to be at every board meeting. It's the same thing. If they're not voting, they're advisory to the board, right? So check your bylaws and see how that is stated. If you're a brand new school in concept, think about that as you develop your bylaws.
I would also get advice from an attorney
Yeah.
as you're developing your bylaws, so that you
For
can
sure.
understand
Most
clearly.
definitely.
Yeah, so you can understand clearly what you're stepping into.
And I might be getting too detailed at this point, but this is part of why I came to get some of these questions answered. In the private realm, which I come from, there were employees, both heads of school and faculty members as voting members on boards. And I don't see that happening in the charter realm. So is it different legal regulations around that, or is it just a different approach?
So the question is about having employees as voting members of the board, either the head of school or teachers on the board. We don't recommend it.
I
Because
know
of,
that's so.
yeah,
What's
no,
the
it's not,
point?
there's no
Why?
Nothing
there's no
statutory.
prohibition, it's because of the conflicts of interest.
Yes, which I understand that. I
So,
just wondered what the
Yeah,
legal piece
no,
was.
our philosophy as an organization is that we don't recommend that because of the intrinsic and extrinsic conflicts of interest. We have one charter school where the board is a majority of teachers are voting members of the board. So now they are their boss's boss. So they would actually, how do they recuse themselves from budget? Because that impacts their salaries, from the evaluation and the contract for their school leader, so you
Well,
have to
name a
really think
decision
about that.
you have to make on the board that wouldn't impact employees.
And then so there is no prohibition either against conflict of interest. There's no law that says you can't have a conflict of interest. It is that you disclose a conflict of interest, and then those people have to recuse themselves from not only the vote, but the discussion around that, because it would influence the vote. Does that make sense? So
Refuse
because
the
of that,
discussion and the vote.
right, so because of that, it just gets really complicated. And when we talk later about the relationship between the board and the school leader and teachers, again, we have a lot of schools that have either the school leader, probably not the school leader as much, but teachers as voting members of the board. It does not always go well. Because you've got a vote from your teachers on some issue, and if the board votes against that vote, that representative votes for it, the board ultimately votes against it, it's seen as they're not listening to us.
So
So
there are
it's
lots
just-
of,
Make sure that you think through how you have your
May I
board
throw in
conference.
there, what about spouses of employees? Because that's question two.
So the question is spouses of employees, it's the same kind of thing. You have to think about any of the conflicts of interest, and it would be disclosing that conflict of interest each time, recusing yourself from the discussion and the vote.
So
So-
salaries of employees.
So salaries of
spouse an
employees, contract terms,
Okay.
calendar.
I would pose the question a little bit differently. What are you trying to accomplish by having a voting member employee on the board? And instead of doing that, I would say put structures in place that set that as an expectation. School administrator, we expect you to be getting information from the teachers and feedback from the teachers on this issue. We'd like to see a written report in this format so that we can make an educated decision and so that our employees have a voice at this table. And then, if you're exercising your duties of care and loyalty, you're hearing that voice and taking it into consideration in your decision.
Right.
I'll have
And then,
snack time with one of you because I've seen it work fairly well in
Sure.
a private model.
Sure. Right.
Two different schools where I've at, it's kind of common, but you're working in a different environment there.
That's
than-
right.
yeah, So.
and there are also several schools that have a teacher representative to the board. So they're not even listed as a board member, they're a teacher representative to the board, so they have the teacher voice at board meetings and can take things back to the staff and bring back the feedback and things like that. So there are mechanisms to get the input. It's, I think to Jen's point, it's why the vote on the board, that's the one that's the crux of the issue
There's no law against it.
sometimes. No, there's no law against that.
And I served on a board once where we had a teacher on the board. And things that would take place in private conversations.
In the executive session.
Exactly. That person went back to their union and disclosed everything he said. I mean,
Yeah, we'll talk a little about executive session. What Steve said is that the problem became that there were some things that were shared in executive session that are not allowed to be shared outside of executive session that were taken to the union rep. And again, there is no prohibition against unions in Colorado in charter schools. They just have not gotten any traction, mostly because of our missions and models. And we tell schools, as long as you have a positive work environment and a positive culture in your school, and the teachers do feel involved in the school and in the programs and the evaluation of the school, we have not had traction with unionizing in our charter schools in Colorado. It's different in Illinois, New York, New Jersey, LA. The unions are pretty much agitating to get into the charter school world. We've been able to kind of fend that off. And again, we're not union bashers by any means, but it's just because of our missions and models, extended school day, extended school year, the things that our teachers are allowed to teach, because we are not required to have licensed teachers in Colorado. We have to have, at this point in time, what is the federal definition of highly qualified teachers, which is in play because of the new rewrite of No Child Left Behind, called ESSA. And we're deep in the throes of a discussion there where we know that they're going to come after us to require licensure of charter school teachers. And that will be a hill we die on. So just understanding that's one of the things we'll be fighting my way this year.
It's fight on the hill.
So what?
It's fight on the hill.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Fighting on the hill, no dying on the hill. There you go. I like that. Thank you very much.
Can I chime in on that real quick?
Yes.
So, this is also a point of clarification. Everybody has the waiver for licensure right now, so the plan currently is that most of you have used the standard language, which is that your teachers will be highly qualified, period. Until that is revised and then approved by the state board, that is what you'll be held to. So you can't just go change your policy on how you hire and set a new bar without it being formally approved under your waiver with the state board, until there's legislation in place that fixes that for you.
Right, because the federal law, federal ruling has come down, and now they're developing the guidelines for that, and we as a state will be developing our own. So at this point in time, we operate under that, understanding it's going to, like,
What's the timeline for that?
this next spring, right? Is that the timeline for having our state rules adopted is this next spring?
Yes.
So it would be implemented for 17, 18.
Is it up to the state legislature or the state board?
Not up to the state board. The state board can implement rules based on the statute, but the legislation would have to change first, because currently our state laws do not speak to the highly qualified caveat that was in the federal law that changed.
Right, the language has now disappeared. So just know we are deep in the throes of that, so you're good, you're protected, we're there for you. Okay, so going through this then, we talked about the open meeting. There is a difference between just an open meeting and a noticed meeting. If those three people, the majority of you, if those three people are meeting for the purpose of talking about school business, it must be noticed at least 24 hours ahead of time, like you would post an agenda. At least 24 hours ahead of time, you post it, you put down the agenda, you must keep commensurate minutes. Short and sweet minutes. Minutes are intended to record votes. They're not intended to record conversations. So you don't want to get into the habit of having 13-page notes, as I just saw from one board, where it said, Julie said this, and then Rob responded this, and then Mary said this, and you don't want to do that. They are really, if you have an agenda and you have sort of a similar template for your minutes, that you are recording only the most critical information, including votes, that's what you kind of want.
Anyone
And
know
then we
why?
have examples that Joni can say.
Anyone want to offer a guess as to why, or know why that's the case? Why are we just recording votes? Why are we not using our minutes as a means of keeping our community up to date to what the board is up to?
Usually see it then as individuals, you can go back and check notes and what were your comments on
It can get
Yeah,
messy.
so the answer is that they're really messy, because if you start, saying, this one said this and this one said this, the greater the likelihood of you misinterpreting what someone said and them coming back saying, well, I never said that. That's not what I meant.
I would go a step further and say it's a liability. You're actually putting the school at risk by putting too much information in your minutes.
Yeah.
If you want to communicate with your community about what happened at the board meeting, you can do so in a newsletter, you can do so in a statement, an announcement from the board, but the minutes themselves should be a historical record of why these policies are in place, essentially. What was the discussion that led to this policy? So that when this issue comes up again, the board doesn't have to rehash it, right? There's a historical context for how that decision was made. That's what the minutes are for.
Should you put names, if it's a 3-2 split, should you put names of who the 3 were or 2, or leave that out?
Yes, again, the question is, should you put names if it's a split vote? We recommend putting names. So that, again, there is a record of who voted for it against it, so that later it can't be either, well, I think so-and-so voted for it. No, I think they voted against it. So just, right, so unanimous, if it's something that's a pretty, like sometimes we have consent agendas at the beginning of a meeting where it's the minutes from the prior meeting, and it's just anything that is just a stamp of that you saw and approved it. That consent agenda is typically just a unanimous vote. That's okay. You don't have to write down everybody. But whenever you think there's going to be a split vote, we recommend writing down the names of who voted which way.
Sorry, Sally, go ahead.
Do you think that includes sort of committee reports? Would you not include those attachments in the minutes? Is that too much detail?
I like committee reports attached to the agenda as a part of the board packet.
Right. And if it's a part of the board packet, it's public, right? So then it should be kept.
So then you don't have to keep the minutes of what was said, because what was said is in the agenda, because it's a part of the board packet, right? So I would also, what was I gonna add? Oh, it just left me. It'll come back.
Okay, I'll add something then. We also don't recommend that you have 3 board members on committees. Because if you do, and you are speaking of school business, you must notice it just like you would a board meeting, and keep the minutes just like you would a board meeting. Whereas if you have 2 board members and then parents and staff and outside people on the committee, then the minutes are not official minutes, they're a record of your meeting. And so that's just for posterity's sake, so that you can track what progress you were making or what action was being taken by a committee. So be careful of having 3 board members on a committee, because you are then required to have a notice meeting.
I would just add a layer to this and say, how do you want to spend your time? Right? If you're taking verbose minutes, then you're having to approve those minutes. And then people are arguing about, well, I didn't say it that way, I want this reworded. And suddenly your board meeting is hijacked by a 15-minute, right? You're smiling. A 15-minute discussion about what the minutes should say, right? That's not how you need to spend your time. When you come together, your efficiency is paramount. And if you're taking straightforward minutes, a record of what happened, that's going to make that a lot more efficient.
Yeah. Yes.
Going back to the board packet being public, for public use, is that something that should be posted along with our minutes on the website?
So the question was about the board packets, and whether the things that are included in the board packet should be then attached at the minutes level. Yes. So again, you are also required once a year to post for a sunshine list. So they call the Open Meetings Act the Sunshine Act for a reason. It's about operating in the sunshine. It's about being transparent and open. So once a year, you have to allow people to join a sunshine list, whereby they get the agendas and board packet, because again, it's open, right, before the meeting. So anything that goes to the board goes to this other listserv group that is your sunshine list. And then, if you have things at the meeting, it's often helpful to have those things be available, have some copies there, so that people can actually follow the conversation that you're having at the board meeting if it's something there. But it's also just for record keeping. So that if in your minutes, for instance, or in your agenda, you're referring to some report, but that report doesn't exist. Because again, make your school person-proof. Make sure that there is a record of what you're doing in the school, so that if you have something that says, and the board looked at all of the numbers for the past, blah, 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 blah. Going forward, you can go back and reference
what that hasn't been done.
It's okay, when you know better, you do better. Like, we all wear our seatbelts now because we know better. Don't go back.
Yeah,
Don't go back.
so again, the question is, so if you haven't been doing that, yeah, and again, if it's easy to go back and do it, or just to make sure they're somewhere, archived somewhere, do that. If it's not, if you really can't go back, don't go back and try to recreate them now. Remember going back to that nonprofit statute that said that we must operate as ordinarily prudent persons and nobody expects you to be an expert in anything? You're going to make mistakes. It's okay. The thing is then trying to correct the mistake and go forward and not willingly and knowingly violating any of these things as a way to get around it or something like that. So the idea is just,
And I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. You ready? There's no board police.
I knew she was
As
gonna
much
say
as
that.
Nora and I would love there to be board police, because it would make our jobs much more fun. There's no board police, and so all of this entire, actually the whole list is about being transparent and open, and here's how we're making decisions, right? And so if you step forward with that effort and you step forward doing your best to keep your community informed, do the best for the school, no one's gonna dock you for that.
yeah, so to that point, that there is no, you will get busted for bad practice by a disgruntled former board member, by a disgruntled teacher or school leader, by a disgruntled parent. That's who's going to say, they do this all the time.
And then suddenly you're
Yeah.
on the front page of the newspaper, right?
Right. So it's just a matter of just catch yourself and say, hey, you know what, guys? We should be doing this, and then just start doing it better. Nobody expects you. The biggest thing, the biggest sanctions you would get, even if it rises to the level of going to the press or going to your authorizer or something like that, is that they will contact you and say, hey, do you know you're doing this wrong? Or, hey, do you know you can't do that, or you should be doing this? And then you say, we just found out, because we called the lead.
So on that note, and I know you have a question, I would say that we're hitting the highlights. Like this right here is a whole day of training. So if there's confusion about this, reach out for help, because we really are just hitting the things that make people go, really?
Yeah.
Really? We have to do that? Yes.
In this day of emails, do you have any suggestions about how we?
That was email.
Why, yes, we do, as a matter of fact. So, the actual open meetings law was written before the advent of so much electronic communication. So there are some other things that you need to be careful of in open meetings. So first of all, with an open versus a notice meeting, I'm going to backtrack just a bit. So when having 3 or a quorum, whichever is fewer, as an open meeting, does not mean that all of you can't go to the holiday party or the soccer game or somebody's birthday party. It doesn't mean that you can't have more board members at an event. What it means is you can't then get together and say, hey, you know that training we went through? You know what we should be doing as a board? You can't start talking about school business, or it should have been a noticed meeting. That's called an open meeting. So if 3 or more of you are standing and talking around the table or something, and somebody walks up, don't stop talking. Because it is an open meeting, right? So somebody comes walking up, one of you in the first place should be the conscience and say, hey guys, we can't talk about school business, because that's a meeting. So one of you should be the conscience. But if somebody comes up, just say, oh, we were just talking about the training that we went to last week, or what I learned at the training, but we actually shouldn't be doing this, so we have to stop. So, it's that kind of thing. So that's the other thing about the open meeting. With email communication, first of all, it is okay for the board chair to do a push email, we call it. So to say, hey, don't forget, we have our board meeting on Thursday night. It's going to be at 6:30 instead of at 6, blah, blah, blah. You can do a push. Our response is put on there so that it's just front and center. Please do not hit reply all. Because with email communication, you can do a one-way, but if somebody says, yeah, when we had the conversation about the board policies, we should think about having a board policy on this. Somebody else hits reply all and says, yeah, because I think now all of a sudden you've gotten into a discussion and it's a meeting. Then we have schools that try to kind of get around this by saying, okay, well, I won't do a hit reply all. Instead, I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to go to you, and I'm going to work the game so that when we come to the meeting, we're ready to make a decision. That's called a serial meeting. So by doing that, you are once again having a discussion with multiple board members. So you can't have a serial meeting. The last one I'll say that actually just came up from an attorney was Google Docs. So now many of us operate by putting docs in, you're just laughing. I'm looking at Celine, she's like, oh yeah. So Google Docs is actually a good way to access information if you're putting something up for people to review. But you can't start doing multiple revisions of that document and then having other people come in and enter into the discussion of revisions of a document, or you're in a meeting.
If you have the quorum.
Correct.
Three, but you can have less.
Correct.
You have two.
Correct. So if you have, for
But
instance,
I do in the meeting.
so
Not three at a time, if you have three people commenting on it, you just created a meeting.
that's
I
right.
did it yesterday, you did it today, he does it
That's
tomorrow.
correct. It
That's
doesn't
a
have,
meeting.
That's a meeting.
that's correct.
Whoa.
Yes, thank you. That's correct.
Not three at the
It's
same
not
time.
time sensitive, it's the number of people. So you can't say, today I'm only going to go to you and you. Tomorrow I'm going to go to you and you.
So
It's the number of people.
Yeah, I would again invite you to ponder that question, does the board exist outside of a board meeting, right? That's a perfect example of, oh, suddenly the board was making decisions in a serial way. I'm gonna bet your follow-up has something to do with logistics.
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
We won't go in.
just a comment,
Sure.
and that is that I was told at my meeting that I had last week, that I'm gonna be given a new email address in the spirit of the open meeting. And so now I have, I'm sure we all do, have at least 3 email addresses that we're following in our lives.
Right.
But that was their way to say, our communication is open, therefore, you as treasurer, you need to get into that chain so that it's, anything that you discuss is available to the public.
So the email itself is available to the public?
Yeah, it's discoverable.
Yeah, no,
So-
it's discoverable.
Yes,
That's
it's
different.
discoverable is different.
That's different. So what he's asking is, if you have like if you have a jameserwin.org URL, I don't know what that is, email address. If you have a jameserwin.org and that's discoverable because it's on the website, here's how we contact our board members, can you then have a discussion among multiple board members? No. It is the same principles apply, that anytime 3 of you are engaged in a discussion, you're having a meeting.
I would add, however, that having an email that is separate, that is a part of your board identity, is a gift. Because should you tiptoe into and have an open records request, if you've exclusively been using that email, that's the only one that is discoverable. If you've been using your personal email, suddenly not only is your personal email discoverable, but so is every device you've accessed that email from.
I'm really worried that if we take a break, a whole bunch of you aren't coming back.
I want to answer their question about logistics. So there's some gray area here, and if you need to set up and suddenly we have an emergency meeting and we need to figure out a time, and I need to email I'm the board chair, I need to email everybody, and I need to know when everyone can meet, and I'm not going to have individual conversations with everybody. Can you reply all in those cases? If you're not doing board business and you're just discovering when can everyone go to the retreat, when can we have this emergency meeting, logistics, you're in a safe zone there.
Well, like, what about suggested revisions to like an agenda? So you've got an agenda, hey, we want to
I
add.
would send that directly to the board president. So the board president should be working with the school administrator to develop the agenda, so there's a role provided to execute that. There were 2 questions in fact.
Can I real quickly repeat that? So the question was about revising an agenda
Oh, yeah, sorry.
and whether or not like multiple people can then respond back to revise an agenda, because logistics are okay. If you're saying, what do you want for lunch? Where is it going to be? Are we going to be doing this? You can do logistics, but you can't get into a discussion of board business. We recommend that 2 board members look at the agenda, like the board chair and vice chair, or board chair and secretary, and the school leader are the ones that work on that agenda. That's one thing. And then the other one is, at the end of a board meeting, take 5 minutes and say, what is it that we need to put on the next agenda? so that you are already setting yourself up for the next agenda. So that's where any board member could say, I really think we need to talk about that concern that was brought forward from that parent. I really would like to see that on the next agenda. So at the end of a board meeting, anticipate the next board meeting.
One, two, three, four.
Now I understand why I was getting emails blank copied, is our board president sends any communications like that for reading blank copies. I was like, I don't know why is it a secret that, you know who the members are, but that's so that anyone who responds is only going back to the sender and not to the.
That's correct. So that's the use of BCC and being able to send something just back. I would argue though, once again, that can't be a discussion or that's that serial meeting if everybody started going. So let's say, for instance, the board treasurer sends out with the packet the finance report for that month. And two different people go to him and say, I don't get it. I thought we were talking about this. Can you clarify this for me? If that's the case and multiple people are going back to him, he should send out the push, the blast email, and say, I've had several questions about our finance report for this month. We'll discuss it at the meeting. Does that make sense? So again, just catching yourself that you're getting into serial meetings. That's one of the most common things that happen.
So this is sort of an extension of the agenda example, but let's say it's another major document like the strategic plan or the community handbook, and the secretary sends it out and asks for feedback to collect that feedback and then bring it to the board meeting with all those edits. Is that
Right. So this was a question of the strategic plan or a community handbook or something like that. Ideally, you would have a small committee working on that, right?
Or a work session.
Or a work, yes. This is another one that, should we do that right?
No, we got it.
So there's so a work session, real quickly.
Okay.
You can do a work session, which is different than a notice board meeting where you would be taking votes. So you can actually at the top of an agenda say work session to work on the strategic plan or to work on the community handbook. That's all you're doing. And then we say qualify by saying no votes will be taken. If you do that, then you're having a meeting, but by saying no votes will be taken, you don't even have to take minutes. What you're doing is just having a work session on a given topic. That helps. It's still open. It's still open, right?
You can't say without public.
No, you can't. Any meeting of 3 or more is open. So even a work session, like if you're doing a board training, you can put work session, board training with the lead from this time to this time. No votes will be made. Yeah, no votes will be taken, no decisions will be made, something like that. But anybody who wants to sit in on that can sit in on that. And it has happened, especially when a school is going through some contention. People will come to hear what the board is being trained on.
Honor the order we get here.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
No, just a comment. I've worked in government for a while. Do not put anything on an email that you do not want to have on the front page of the Denver Post.
Absolutely.
We are finding that out in our national elections, right?
We've known that for 30
Exactly.
years.
So this was a comment rather than a question, and it was, do not put anything in an email that you don't want to be discovered and put on the front page of the Post. So to that open records idea then, anything you put in an email as a board member is discoverable through open records. There are allowables and disallowables with open record requests, and that's in the packet, in the Peter sheets. But just understand, and even with the email, that would be your personal email, we have had cases where someone has brought forward, we're doing an open records request for emails among board members, and I know that they also use their personal emails. Like their school email is a ploy, and they're still using their personal emails. If that can be proven at all, your personal emails will be discovered. About the school, about schools.
There's a question here, and here. You're good? Okay.
I have a question from Kirsten from Pagosa Springs, and it's more a comment really, I think, Kirsten, but she says, I have a question for Nora. How would we get anything done? We would have to get together every day.
If if you had this open meeting. Well, so this is the idea of committees and of pulling other people in to help you do your work, and you are a governing body. And so for the committee structure and things like that, and it's really hard in small communities, and small schools, and new schools, it's really hard to develop that capacity. And again, you just have to do it then. You just have to keep posting 24 hours ahead of time and keeping minutes and just keep doing that if you have to have 3 board members there. So unfortunately, there's no legal way around that.
Is it possible to post notice of an executive work session? Like we're in the middle of some lease negotiations and that's not public. But can we post we're having an executive session?
So the executive session is covered next in the pewter sheets.
Okay.
So an executive session cannot be a standalone.
Okay.
You must start out, I mean, that can be the meeting. It can be the meeting, but you have to open in open session, adjourn by 2/3 voice vote into executive session. It has to be listed as the Colorado Revised Statute, which is in here. You adjourn into executive session. Executive session does not have minutes. It has a recording. It's not called minutes. Those recordings must be held for 90 days, then can be either taped over or erased. But you must keep the recording. That is not discoverable through open records per se. There has to be an elected official who actually requests that. They will determine whether you violated anything in executive session. And then you adjourn back into open session, and votes have to be taken in open session, not in executive session.
But if there's no voting happening.
If there's no voting, you just come back out, adjourn the open meeting, and you're done.
Okay.
So this recording,
An audio recording of the executive session, that's by law.
That's an exception.
Yes, there are 2 reasons that you can stop the recording. So if you are getting legal advice from an attorney because of attorney-client privilege, you state that, and the attorney has to be there so that it's not like you're just doing it for, the attorney has to say, I am the attorney for the school and we are adjourning this meeting for attorney-client advice. And then you stop the recording and you can then, we're now restarting the recording after that's done. The only other reason is to talk about a student. So something has happened at the school, there's been a, discipline issue, there's been a tragedy, something, there's been something about, like you as board members will never see individual student scores. It typically winds up happening because it's a behavioral or a discipline issue. You can stop the recording. We are stopping the recording now to discuss the student discipline issue.
Is that true also for staff issues?
No.
It's individual, okay.
No. For staff issues, if you are talking about individual staff members, you must notify them that they're being talked about in executive session, and you must give them the opportunity to have it heard in open session. Our advice is invite them into executive session. No one other than the voting board members has a right to be in executive session. You can invite somebody to come into executive session who has a background in something that you're going to be discussing. So upon invitation, you could invite us in, you could invite like an architect to come in to talk about something that has to do with a contract. You could invite people in, but you have to let somebody individually know, not a student, because a student doesn't have, but the teacher, you would let them know that you're talking about them, give them the right to have it heard in open session. It has happened, and it is very messy, that sometimes that teacher will then show up with a posse. They'll show up with 50 parents who support them, and they'll want it discussed in open session, because they don't know what you're going to say. So instead, I would invite them into an executive session and say, we're going to invite you into executive session so that when we discuss this, you can hear what is being discussed and give your point of view. And then you could ask them to leave.
If that's potentially gonna happen at your school, reach out for help. Reach out for someone, reach out to the league for coaching on that, because there's a way to handle the language and there's a way to preserve the relationship without escalating the problem, right? And so don't try and do it alone. There's plenty of people who've done this before, who've watched it happen before, who can help you. Sorry, I just gave that all to you.
It can be a discussion. It can be a discussion.
In executive session?
Yeah,
Oh,
because my
yeah.
understanding
Oh,
was
yeah.
they could only come in and make a statement and then
No.
leave, but they can come in and
Yeah.
participate in the discussion.
Just a question on work sessions.
Yes.
If you're gonna have at least a forum at a work session, are you required to post a notice?
Yes, so the question is, in a work session, if you're gonna have 3 or more, yes, it has to be posted just like a regular meeting in the regular places that you post. One of those places should be a physical posting, like at the front of the school, on a bulletin board, something like that. And one should be electronic, and again, there's no rules about that, it's just sort of to access. Because if you put it only electronically, one could argue you're not keeping them open to the public because somebody may not have a computer or may not have access. So try to post like one at the school and one on your website or something like that. So you have to post it 2 places. But it has to be posted just like a regular meeting.
And then are you required to post minutes?
No, and then because it's a work session, no votes will be taken or no decisions will be made. Remember, minutes are really intended to record votes. So you don't even have to keep minutes, or you're keeping them just for the work that you're doing.
I want to go back just to the previous topic about email. If you are the board chair and you need to push out information, I used to put it right at the top of in my salutation. Please don't reply all to this email. If you have a question, you can reply directly to me. And then I would follow through with my email after that. So it's just a practice to, if you start your email with that, it's just a little reminder. I still hover over that reply all button. I haven't been on a board for 6 years, something like that, and I still hover over that button going, is this okay? Can I do this?
We have one more question from Jeff Sanders. example, and
Don't want this just open to anybody from your parent community or from the larger community. This is one you want to really hand pick with people who will deeply understand your budget, your revenue, your expenses, your cash on hand, your year-to-date, your audits, all of those kinds of things. Okay? And then they too will just kind of make sure you go through this checklist every year and make sure everything is correct. Okay?
yeah.
Okay. So now, let's take a look at the salmon colored sheets for your basic individual board responsibilities. So like we were saying earlier, let me real quickly, and I apologize, real quickly before we go on. We talked earlier about new schools and about your critical documents and making sure that everything stays aligned. This is much easier to do when you are a young school. Develop a process by which you are constantly doing a crosswalk to make sure that your critical documents are in sync. You have an application that is included in your contract by reference only. So not everything in your application is going to be in your contract with your authorizer, only the most critical things. But that said, the things in your application, you as board members should at least be familiar with. And then in your contract with your authorizer, you are held to given metrics around academics and finance and operations and things like that. You should know what's in your contract. Then you have bylaws. And the bylaws determine how you as a board operate. Terms, elections, officers, meeting times, or meeting schedules, all of those kinds of things in your bylaws. Then you typically have a policy manual. The board policy manual, likewise, you should understand. Know that policies are very often reactive. So don't think you have to have some exhaustive list of policies when you open your doors. Don't policy yourselves into a box. We already, as charter schools, when the charter school law passed, we created this box within which we could bounce around. That box over the years has gotten smaller and smaller. We're, as an organization, always pushing out those box limits. Don't create those boxes for yourselves internally by over-policying yourself. Understand that very often they're reactive. School leaders, something happens at the school and the school leader says, looks around, especially if you're new, looks around and says, do we have a policy for that? We should have a policy for that. And then presents a policy to the board that they would like the board to adopt. Something like that is very typical in happening. So policy yourselves into a box. But if you look at these kinds of things, make sure that they're aligned. Because where we see it then really fall out of sync is when from your policies that have been adopted, now you have handbooks within the school every year. And on the ground, something may not work exactly like the policy was intending. So it's typical, being an old, and I don't say former, I say old school leader. I can tell you, very often we'll say, yeah, it doesn't work. Let's just do it this way and see how this works. If you do something like that on the ground in a school and then you put that into a handbook, you may not be in violation of your policies. And again, there's no policy police. It's going to be a cranky parent, an older student, a former teacher. It's going to be somebody who's going to say they're violating your policies all the time. They put new things into the handbook, but if you look at what the policy says. So somebody has to make sure you're doing a crosswalk among your critical documents so that this doesn't trip you up as you now are a 10-year-old school. So that's another thing.
Just anecdotally, for those of you in newer schools, I'm envious of the bylaws that you have now because you've benefited from the years of development and the years of evolution of those bylaws. And so you're actually set up to do really well. Similarly with policy, reach out to others and see what other schools have in place because you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right. And that's exactly right. We have examples of bylaws, examples of policies. You can even just look at the table of contents of a policy manual of a new school if you're an older school. You can do those kinds of things. We have an internal general counsel, director of policy. We can't act and would never act as your attorney or give you legal advice, but we can share like, yeah, you're good to do that, or you're going to need legal advice on this. Does that make sense? So just make sure of those kinds of things. And then as we said, directors and officers insurance protects you And then that is usually in your liability insurance policy. You may want to check that if you are a board member and just confirm that your school is in good standing with a liability insurance that includes directors and officers insurance. Okay, so now, the individual responsibilities, this is the salmon sheet. These are not prioritized, but these are, once again, these are like the personification of your duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. This, and then on the next pages as well, are your roles. So if you think about these things, I'm actually going to pull out some specific ones, if that's all right. So we talked about the first one, that's the duty of care. The school's mission, that's like your holy grail. You need to really make sure that you are committed to the mission and the model of the school, or it may not be a good fit for you as a board member. That's what these next ones are. The one that's about halfway down that says make a personal contribution to the school, financial contribution if possible. When I was a school leader and we did like an annual giving campaign, I tried to get everybody in our school community to donate. And it could be 50 cents. It doesn't, it's not as much the amount as it is saying 100% of our faculty, 100% of our board, and 90% of our parents have contributed to our annual fund. If you are at all trying to build goodwill in the community through fundraising with philanthropic organizations or individuals, by you saying, look, we've got some skin in the game, that's important. So when it says this, we talk about work, wealth, and wisdom, right? Of being on a board. Most of us are the work and the wisdom part of it, not the wealth part of it. We talk about the fact we are not titular boards in charter schools. Hopefully none of you got in this to pad your resume, and hopefully you're not in it for the money, because we're working boards, right? So most of us don't come from wealth that we can give multiple thousands of dollars. Instead, what we need to do is make sure that we can give something so that we can use that, both financially, of course. If you can give more, heck yeah, give more. But also to be able to use that as fundraising. So when it says that, sometimes that turns people off, and it's really more about participation than it is the contribution itself. The other one then, the inform others. Oh, you know what? I have one of these. Look at this. I am showing that I have a little pointer here. Inform others about the school and be an ambassador. This is another one that what our mothers always said holds true for us as board members, school leaders, teachers within a school, parents within a school. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. If you can't be an ambassador for the school, there's a problem. Think about that in terms of building the culture within the school as well, with faculty, with parents, things like that. Because this is where, when we talked about, you are never a board member per se, or a board, when you walk out of the school, but in this sense, you are. Because when somebody finds out that you're on the board at PSAS, and they start talking about, oh yeah, I've heard about that school, tell me about it, you're like, oh my God, are we ever a mess? I mean, I gotta tell you. If that's how you talk about the school whose board you're on, that's a problem. You've got to be able to be the ambassador. The other thing is, for us in a very selfish way in the charter school world, having you be an ambassador for a charter school is also being an ambassador for the sector. So if any of you have connections with the Rotary or Kiwanis or any of those chambers, any of those kinds of groups, we will help you develop a dog and pony show. So that you can go to their whatever, chamber breakfasts or Rotary lunches or whatever they are, so that you can go to those and spend 10 minutes talking about charter schools and how we're organized and how we're funded. We'll help you do that. Then you take 15 minutes and you're doing the dog and pony show about your school. And you've got sometimes like pretty pictures of kids, really engaged families, all of those kinds of things. And then at the end, this is a great way for you to get board members, you say. And the most interesting thing about us is that we are governed by independent boards, and we're always looking for good people on our boards. If any of you are interested, I'll hang around afterwards, come and talk to me. It's a great way to get board members. So this idea of being an ambassador is huge. And then the last real quick one is, how many employees do you as a board have? Steve, you're cheating. Steve has been to every one of these for like the last 15 years.
That's true.
Yes, you have one employee, and so your job is to hire the very best person you can as your school leader. Make sure you have an accurate job description. Make sure that you have an evaluation system in place that you all agree is fair, transparent, objective, rigorous, and then to support that person. If you can't do that, that's a problem. So that's another one that is one of your greatest responsibilities.
So I would just add to this that so prepare yourselves. You will have someone on your board who is not a good ambassador at some time. At some point, someone will get on the board with an agenda. They will be voted on, they will find their way onto the board and reveal themselves as having an agenda and will not be a good ambassador. And so it's your role as a fellow board member to help check that and to have a process to do it and have a transparent, open conversation with that person about expectations and to keep that in check because it is part of being a good board member too. So not just your own ambassadorship, but ensuring that other board members are ambassadors as well.
And then the very last thing is that we really believe strongly in some kind of a board agreement or board norms. Some schools will actually talk about a code of conduct for their board members, not so hot on that language, but a board agreement. And then being an old teacher, I like I statements where you kind of create something that says, I as a board member agree to, and then pick these parts. Have them. I agree to do these things. I agree to be an ambassador to the school. I agree to support the mission of the school. So doing something like that, that then again, you commit to annually, and that not if, but when there is bad board behavior, because there will be. That's not something you can go into executive session for. But when the school or when the board chair takes a board member offline and says, look, you've been coming unprepared to our meetings. Our board agreement says I agree to come prepared for all of our meetings and willing to discuss and take hard votes. You gotta come prepared. If and when that doesn't happen, you then can go back to a commitment to your board agreement, and if need be, and again, I hate to say this, but don't be afraid to do it. If you need to vote off a toxic board member, you need to vote off a toxic board member.
Jump to 30,000 feet, that's your duty of loyalty and care of the business.
It can be really corrosive to have somebody on the board that just agitates constantly. And as we said, people will try to find the chink in the armor. They'll try to find that board member they can agitate to. They'll try to find that person that is representing their point of view and not the overall health and wellness of the school. So that's where a board agreement helps, and it really helps you then through that process as well. And then we are going to stop because I want everyone to know I am almost on time.
You are absolutely
It's
almost
because
on
of
time.
Jen. I am not known for being punctual, but it's time for a break. So we're going to take a break until 11 o'clock, so it's about 12 minutes right now. Let's take a break and come back. If you want to ask questions in between, please do. All of you get to go get another cup of coffee, use the bathroom, and then come back at 11 o'clock. Okay?
And also,
Thanks, everybody.
if there are a lot of people going to the restroom, there's also go all the way down the hall through the double doors in their restroom there. Just a little walk.
And you can check your PDA.
And you might have noticed we don't get good reception down here, but if you just go up to the stairs, upstairs a little bit on your phone.
Yeah,
Well, anytime, you can always email us, and this could be